Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Tom Ortiz. Tom, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tom, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I started my career at Los Alamos National Laboratory back in the mid 1990s, and I did work on thermodynamic experiments with high pressure metal hydrogen systems. And I continued working on hydrogen when I left Los Alamos to finish my PhD at Purdue University. And I wrote papers on the use of hydrogen energy systems. And then I actually switched and I wrote my dissertation on the use of recycled carbon dioxide as a zero global warming potential refrigerant substitute for air conditioners and heat pumps. And in those days, those were not topics that were of the high level of concern and visibility that they are today. So I ended up going into the oil and gas business because that is where an energy systems engineer went in the years right around the turn of the century. And as it turns out, I ended up working for ExxonMobil in Houston, and I worked on a project to develop their proprietary reservoir simulator, which is a piece of software, a very large piece of software that helps predict where the best places to drill wells might be. And I ended up writing code that helped to manage the flow of injected gas inside the reservoir and also through surface production facilities. It turns out that you actually do inject as much fluid in some cases as you take out of the ground when you're in the oil business. Fast forward several years, and I ended up working for the state of Texas in a role where I was a member of a committee that recommended approval of leases to store carbon dioxide offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And that is a mandate that was given to the land office by the Texas legislature. I believe it was around 2007, 2009, that time frame. So the skills that I learned in the oil industry and the skills that I learned working with renewable and alternative energy systems all came back in a virtuous circle together, and I ended up basically marrying them in that work on carbon dioxide sequestration. And I felt that the time was ripe for me to write about this adventure in a way that tries to help people understand what all of the real costs and benefits to all of the different energy systems that we use are, and what the real opportunities are and maybe are not for a clean energy transition.
Tom, I was going to ask you what's the genesis of the book, Why We Struggle to Go Green, but I think you just answered it. But if I didn't get that correctly, what was the genesis for that book, and what do you hope to communicate to your readership or greater audience with the book?
One of the things that I hope to do is to reach an audience that is somewhere in the middle between people who might just read about clean energy in the newspaper or on television or on podcasts, and people who will dive deeply into academic scientific literature. I'm trying to find that sweet spot where I can give people information about the technical details of systems like hydrogen, carbon capture, recycling, the circular economy, and give it the depth that it deserves, but without being unapproachable in the way that some of the professional literature can be. And so I wanted people to have that opportunity because it occurred to me over the past several years that there seems to be a lot of hype surrounding new technologies, especially things like electric vehicles and fuel cells. And I really worry that we are not getting the right kind of message from business leaders and policymakers about what's truly possible and what we really need to do if we indeed want to seriously tackle the greenhouse gas emission problem.
So, what are some of the harsh realities of the green transition as you see it?
I would say the biggest harsh reality is the fact that for the first time in human history, we're going backward, or we are intending to go backward as a civilization to use energy sources that are less dense and less convenient than what we've had before. Humans originally depended almost exclusively on their own muscle power, and then later on the muscle power of domesticated animals. But the amount of energy that humans had per capita was almost static for thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, we figured out how to first use biomass, and then the first uses of fossil fuels, coal in the United Kingdom and in Western Europe, to power machinery. And then from there, oil and gas and nuclear power. We have increased the amount of energy that we have per person to use by orders of magnitude. It's almost impossible to imagine. But one of the ways in which I've seen it written and that I cite in the book is that we now use the energy of several billion, actually several 100 billion virtual people as mechanical servants. And that is only because we have these incredibly dense energy sources. The catch is, and this is where the harsh reality comes in, the catch is that those dense energy sources were deposited by geologic processes, concentrated veins of minerals, including the uranium that goes into nuclear power plants, concentrated sources of oil and gas that were deposited over millions and millions of years. And we're drawing those down almost like a bank account. And once they're gone, they're not coming back, at least in anything like a time frame that matters to human beings. So what we have to do instead is we have to use energy sources that we can replenish at a time scale that matches our own lifespan. And that means relying on the sun like plants do. Solar energy from photovoltaic panels or concentrated solar panels, or mirrors that concentrate heat, wind turbines, all of these things capture energy in minute amounts. And there's a lot of that energy, but it takes an awful lot of hardware to gather it in enough quantities that it's useful to us. And that means it's expensive. It takes a huge amount of land, something like 10 times the amount of land that we currently use with a conventional gas-fired power plant. And people need to understand that is not going to change. We cannot engineer these fundamental limitations on clean energy completely away.
So how do we move towards trying to either maybe, I was going to say ameliorate, but that may not be the right word, manage these increased costs of clean energy? Or is that just a cost to bear?
The simplest answer is we're going to have to use less. We're going to have to become more intentional about what we build as a society. And that doesn't mean going back to the Stone Age and hunting animals with sticks, But the amount of energy that we have and the amount of materials, which is as important, that we extract to produce the things that we use using energy, those amounts will depend crucially on the number of people that we have on this planet. Like energy usage, population has soared. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just this weekend about a book published at the University of Texas at Austin by two economists. And their book is called The Depopulation Bomb. And they appear from the article to argue that more people are always better in an essentially unqualified sense. And that shocks me because we're not using fewer resources per person than we used to. Just the opposite. We're using far more resources per person than our ancestors used to. So we're going to have to stop doing that. And that means thinking about what we really need to have a good life. Do we absolutely need space tourism? Do we need AI chatbots to write term papers and create cat videos? Do we need cryptocurrencies? Or can we get by without some of these possibly novel, ultimately not necessarily very satisfying technologies in an absolute sense, and go back to living the way people did perhaps around the turn of the 20th century, where life was good, but it wasn't as profligate as it's turning out to be now and is looking to be even more so in the future.
Tom, one of your clarion calls is about delay. Can you explain why you find delay to be almost invidious or at least definitely a detriment going forward?
You are located in a place that has seen firsthand in the very recent past what storm intensification can do. And the longer we wait to increase our resilience to what is inevitably going to be an intensification of storms, an intensification of droughts, an intensification of heat waves, the more expense that we're going to have, not just in money, but in lives and livelihoods. We have to come to grips with the fact that we need to make these investments, that those investments are going to crowd out spending in other areas, and that the longer we defer investments in infrastructure and in resilience, the more people are going to get hurt, the more unnecessary suffering is going to occur. And so I really want policymakers to think hard, even if they don't like to couch this in terms of climate change. Just think about it as an expense that you're going to make. Do you want to spend the money on dams, on moving property to safer areas, on hardening the electric grid, or do you want to spend the money on disaster relief? I think we have a moral obligation to do the former and not the latter.
And we've talked about business and government, but let me turn to another realm, and that's academia. I'm the son of an engineering professor. And so growing up in that world, I saw a lot of people, very smart people, getting engineering degrees, moving into the workforce, some into industry, some stayed in academia, others went to the government or state or federal government. What do you see the role of academia in this in terms of both the development of engineers and scientists to help with these problems, and then being sort of a place for debate, a place where you can discuss these issues? I was a liberal arts guy, so I never sat around and watched you engineers debate, but we had plenty of debates in liberal arts, and I'm sure you guys did in your disciplines as well. What do you see the role of academia, and as wide or as narrow as you want to talk about?
That's a great question. And first of all, let me say I am also the son of an engineer. I'm the son of a mechanical engineer. I'm the grandson of an electrical engineer. I grew up around those kinds of discussions. My grandfather used to take me down to work with him in his wood shop, and he had models, scale models of all of the different airplanes that Boeing manufactured. He was on the team that originally designed the 747. So I grew up wanting to do something like that, to build something or develop something that would be useful to society. It's not exactly what I thought it would be. And that's because engineering, I think, especially in the academic realm, has changed a lot. When I was a graduate student in the late 1990s, even at that time, I saw engineering professors as more than anything managers of research groups. And so much of their time was spent going after funding, writing grant proposals, trying to convince industrial sponsors to fund their students' projects. And it's a necessary part of the profession. But what it has done, and I think this is even more true now, is it has turned academic engineers into entrepreneurs. They spend so much time trying to build personal brands and spin-off companies and marketing opportunities for their products that they've left behind, in some sense, the more pure mission of advancing knowledge, of training students, and of providing society with an educated, informed, and realistic, if not unbiased, picture of what technology can and should do for the wider society. And so I would like academia to be able to have the freedom to discuss technology, to develop technology, to propose technological solutions that are not driven strictly by the need to get funding from private interests in order to keep their research labs going. I think that's the wrong way for us to run the university system. And it's only becoming more necessary as state legislatures not only eliminate funding for higher education, but also interject their own policy and political aspirations and interests into what happens inside the university. I think the university is a place where we need to be hands-off politically, and we need to give academics the chance to be able to say, this is a technology that is limited, it is powerful, it is useful, it is too expensive, whatever it is that they feel is necessary to communicate to the general public, so that when we spend that money in the private sector or in government laboratories, we have some sense of whether or not it may be the best idea for us. And that includes things now like AI. I keep coming back to that because I see that as such a huge opportunity to limit the amount of energy and greenhouse gas emissions that we generate by curbing some of its more frivolous impulses. And it's certainly not the only example, but it seems to be the example du jour.
I can still remember the first Earth Day in 1971 because I was in junior high school. And the topic that day was ZPG, or zero population growth. And one of the things I took away from that event that I've taken forward to today is that there's an adaptability of the human species. And we're, I think, 2 billion more people on Earth now than there were 50 years ago. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. But you've already mentioned growth and perhaps limits. How can we move to either redistribute in a sustainable way or begin to think through some of the ways to serve this explosion of population that I don't really see slowing down much?
So one of the ways that I think we are blind to the way that we have adapted, to use that word that you just did, we throw energy and we throw materials at these problems. And the poster child for this is our engineering of the nitrification cycle. We rely absolutely on synthetic chemical fertilizers to feed the world. If we stopped producing synthetic nitrogen-based fertilizers, half the world would starve to death. I mean, that's just a fact. We cannot farm anymore in a way that relies solely on natural solar-based methods and expect to support the population. So we use cheap natural gas, and we use the Haber-Bosch process, which was developed at the beginning of the 20th century, to turn nitrogen in the air and hydrogen that we make from methane into food. We eat natural gas. That's a truth that I think many people don't really realize. So if we're going to adapt to continuing human population growth in a more sustainable way, we need to think about how we can do that without relying on a non-renewable resource. And that means perhaps that instead of making our hydrogen from natural gas, we lean in much, much more to green hydrogen for our fertilizers. And that means making the hydrogen that we need for ammonia from splitting of water. And of course, the catch is there that it's much more expensive. It requires an enormous amount of electricity. And we're going to have to be real about that. We're going to have to pay more for food, which means we're going to have to waste a lot less food. We waste something like 40% of the food that we produce. It's shocking. And in this country, there's really no excuse for the amount of food that we waste. So to serve a huge and growing population in a way that doesn't draw down our natural capital irreversibly, we're going to have to eliminate waste. And that means we're going to have to shoulder more of the burden of that as individuals. We're going to have to accept that we're going to pay more, that we're going to use less. And that's not a popular message. So I would hope that policymakers and business leaders would be more honest with constituents and consumers about that.
Tom, I'd like to turn to your publishing journey and your work with Stony Creek Publishing. Could you tell us how you were introduced to Stony Creek and what was your experience like working with them?
When I decided to write the book, I sent, like many authors, I sent a book proposal to a wide variety of publishers, and I got an awful lot of rejections, as most of us do. And I got a few promising bites, mostly from university presses. But I had been reading Lauren Steffi's work in the Houston Chronicle in particular, but also in Texas Monthly. And I also knew his history at Bloomberg for many years. So I knew him by reputation. I liked his work. I liked his writing. And when I saw that he had his own fairly new publishing company, I thought that looked like a very promising avenue through which to publish. And so I also sent him a proposal, and he got back to me. And at that time, I still had two other presses that were interested in my book. And I asked him, Lauren, can I explore these other two opportunities just to see what they might say before giving you a final answer? And he was very gracious about that. Said, by all means, let me know when you want to pursue this matter further. And that really spoke to me. And I thought, now this is an organization that I felt like I could really work with, that I could really communicate with. And even in the absence of perhaps greater financial reward, one never knows, I knew that it was a good place to publish. And I have been extremely happy with the working relationship I've had with Stony Creek. Everyone there is very easy to talk to, easy to work with, easy to reach. The work that they have done has been first rate. I'm very happy with the design of the book. The editors were very professional. So it's been a first-class experience for me. And I'm very grateful to Stony Creek for them giving me this chance. And I'm glad that they're here in the publishing world. I think they're a good publishing house for Texas and for the country. And I also think it's great as an Aggie. I have an MBA in finance from Texas A&M University. I'm a graduate of their full-time program in College Station, and I lived in College Station for 5 years. So it's nice to be distributed through Texas A&M University Press and to have that connection to Aggie land once again. I had a great time studying and living there. So it's just a really nice experience overall.
Tom, we're nearing the end of this podcast. Before we get to the end, I wanted to ask you a few quick questions on a lightning round. Was there one book or thinker that influenced your views on sustainability?
The book by Valero, and I am going to struggle with the precise title, but it was a book about the thermodynamics of energy consumption. That was a very important trigger for me. Engineers often study thermoeconomics, the relationship between thermodynamics and the economic feasibility of designs. But that connection has much broader ties to macroeconomics in general. And that book by Valero was a gateway for me to learning more about how a small and I think much underappreciated segment of economists have realized that there are physical limitations to the size of the human economy, and we need to acknowledge that.
If there's one myth about going green that you could help to debunk or would like people to be aware of, what would that be?
It would be that we can, the myth that we can somehow save the planet in 60 seconds, which is a line from one of the morning news shows in Austin. And I like the idea that they're trying to promote things like recycling and composting. Those are all very laudable goals, but telling people or giving people the misguided impression that we can just do a little bit, a few minutes a day and solve this problem, that's harmful thinking. we're not going to find some silver bullet technological solution that solves climate change. We're going to have to fundamentally and radically change our behavior as a species. And people need to hear that.
And finally, what's next for Tom Ortiz?
I have another idea for a book about mathematical modeling. As I've delved into this clean energy conundrum, which is something that's been with me for decades, and as I see cryptocurrency and data centers as profligate users of energy, I've also been looking at the way in which we use mathematics to solve problems, something that's core to engineering thinking. And I worry that we are losing sight of what math can and should do for us in terms of leading us to physical solutions to our problems, and what maybe it shouldn't, how we use those models. So I would like to explore in greater depth what the right approach to mathematical thinking about problem solving should be. And that includes using things like artificial neural networks, because in my opinion, they are powerful tools and they can be very useful, but they are, at the end of the day, just very large scale versions of what we used to call in engineering school curve fitting. You are taking variables that have no necessarily physical connection with one another, and you're correlating them with phenomena that in the age of what they call AI now, you can't even really observe or understand. And I think that's dangerous. So I'm going to dig into that and help people to explain, again, at this level that I think is somewhere between journalism and academia, why simpler is often smarter.
Tom, we are unfortunately now at the end of our time, but before we leave, I wanted to ask you, if our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out more about the book, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
Why We Struggle to Go Green is available right now for pre-order on Amazon, at Barnes Noble, at all of the major platforms, Kobo, and also it is available in print from Amazon and other retailers, and it is available directly from Texas A&M University Press.
Tom, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.